Our purpose as the church is not self-expression. We like doing church a little differently than the other churches, so therefore now we church this way. No, our purpose as the church is about God exaltation, period. Our identity has been given, and now our mission is being handed out. We are chosen, redeemed, and loved so that something might happen through us. And Peter says, proclamation. Proclamation. That you may proclaim. Peter wants us to see that the grace that saves us also sends us out into the world. The church does not exist purely to preserve itself, to build a brand, or to maintain comfort for ourselves. The church exists to proclaim the excellencies of God, to display His beauty, to display His character and His gospel to the world. That is why we gather. That is why we come together, to proclaim. Our purpose as the church is not self-expression. We like doing church a little differently than the other churches, so therefore now we church this way. No, our purpose as the church is about God exaltation, period. And I really do like saying period when I want to emphasize something. I'm going to fix that, I promise. To proclaim here doesn't just mean speaking words, though. I want that to be pretty clear. It does include that, all right, but the Greek term exangelo carries the idea of announcing, to declaring, or to make known. It's both a verbal and visible word. We proclaim God's excellencies in our words and in the way we live our lives. We proclaim God's excellencies in our words and in our lives. The world should be able to look to the church and hear with their eyes what we confess with our mouths. Did you catch that? Hear with their eyes what we confess with our mouth. That God is glorious, that He is gracious, and that He is good. Peter ties this whole thing to the gospel story, of course. He says, He called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. This is conversion language. The movement from ignorance and rebellion into forgiveness and renewal. Every believer is a walking testimony of this miracle. Every one of us. Your personal story of grace is meant to become a public story of praise. We talk all the time about learning to share your testimony, becoming comfortable in that. Here's a really simple, practical kind of side tool tip for you. If you've never shared your testimony before, no one's ever taught you how to do that or why it's important, I'll just give you a real quick tool guide. And that's this. To share your testimony is to share who you were before you found Christ, what it was like when you found Christ, and what your life has been like since you found Christ. It's that simple. You can do it in 90 seconds or 90 minutes. I would suggest you practice a 90-second version because not everyone wants the 90-minute version, okay? But that is a very simple way in which you can prepare yourselves to share your testimony in an appropriate time. And at the Grove Church, we often say the gospel is the centerpiece of everything we do. And this verse is showing us why. The gospel doesn't just bring people into the church, it gives the church its purpose. And when the gospel sits at the center, proclamation becomes a very natural overflow of our worship. We proclaim God's excellencies when we gather on Sunday and sing of His greatness. We proclaim them when we serve our neighbors with joy, when we speak truth in love, when we forgive as we have been forgiven. We proclaim them when we live a distinct lives in a world that's forgotten what holiness looks like. That is how we proclaim the gospel. Notice the logic. God doesn't wait for perfect people to proclaim His glory. God doesn't wait to pick perfect people to proclaim His glory. He actually takes people from darkness and then just makes them messengers right away. That is what He does. God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. That is how this works, brothers and sisters. Our purpose then isn't to make ourselves impressive. It's not to build ourselves up, to posture ourselves into a position that we don't deserve. It's actually just to make God known. So in the simplest of ways, in every act of service, in every song of worship, in every step of obedience, we have the opportunity to use a megaphone for his mercy. And so whether that be here as we gather on a Sunday morning, or whether it be when we go out into our day-to-day lives and we live our Monday to Saturday life, right? In everything we do, we have the opportunity, every act of service, every job, every hobby, every form of family encouragement time, whatever it is that you have, we have an opportunity to be obedient and to use this megaphone to share God's mercy. So when Peter says that you may proclaim the excellencies of him, he's describing not just the mission of the church, but the joy of the redeemed. We exist to proclaim the one who called us. And that means every moment of our lives becomes an opportunity for worship. And we should reflect that. Our next point that we're going to see is that we are a people that are shaped by mercy. And this is starting in 1 Peter 2:10. Peter says this, "Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy." Now, at first glance, this reads like a really simple contrast, right? Then and now. But underneath is one of the richest gospel summaries in all of Scripture. Peter reaches back nearly 8 centuries to the prophet Hosea, whose entire life was meant to act out God's relentless mercy towards his unfaithful people. Hosea was told to marry Gomer, a woman who would betray him through his painful marriage. God painted a living picture of his covenant love. And even when Israel ran after other gods, God said, "Those who were not my people, I will call my people, and those who had not received mercy, I will show mercy." And now Peter is picking that story back up again, and he says, that promise has been fulfilled in you from 800 years ago. The church is the living proof that God keeps his word. Those that were once far off have been brought near. Those who had no claim on mercy have been overwhelmed by it. The church is not a collection of good people improving themselves. Let me say that again. The church is not a collection of good people improving themselves. It is a community of forgiven people amazed by grace. We are so in love with the Lord has done for us. We're so overflowed from our mind and into our heart that it is undeniable that we must gather on Sunday and worship with one another and then share that in the rest of our lives, Monday through Saturday. That is what we are, a community of forgiven people that are amazed by grace. Mercy is the great equalizer. It removes all boasting. It kills all comparisons. There's no ladder to climb in God's family because everyone stands on level ground at the foot of the cross. Everyone stands on level ground at the foot of the cross. That means that the most seasoned saint and the brand new believer stand side by side, both held up by mercy. This is what shapes our church's tone. Mercy is what softens our hearts towards one another. It makes us patient. It makes us forgiving. It makes us humble. And when we forget mercy, we become rigid. We become self-righteous. We become a cold people. And it starts with us becoming cold to the world and the need for mercy and care and love. And at some point, it goes from that to moving inside, where we then become cold to one another. I don't know how many people have visited many churches, but I'm sure some of you could raise your hand and say, I've been in a church that has felt cold before. It gets that way when you forget mercy. You forget grace. You stop loving those outside, and at some point you stop loving those inside too. The church loses its beauty when we forget mercy. The church loses its beauty when we forget mercy. the Grove Church, this is a part of what we mean when we talk about gospel centrality. The gospel not only defines what we believe, it shapes how we relate to one another. The more deeply we grasp God's mercy towards us, the more merciful we can become towards others. Our brothers and sisters here that we spend time with every week, and those that are outside of the church. So when Peter says, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people, he's reminding us that belonging is not achieved by merit, but it was bestowed upon us by mercy. Mercy is the very air we need to breathe. It's what gives life to our worship, depth to our community, and hope to our mission. Because if I can be redeemed, then so can everyone else of Union Grove and the surrounding area and the world. A church shaped by mercy becomes a living witness of the gospel, a people whose very existence says God's grace is real. Let me tell you about it.